Hi guys, my name is Kristy Wolfe and I am a storytelling photographer based in Canmore, Alberta. I'm also an educator and a speaker, and I am, maybe most importantly, a medical mom, and that is one of the ways that I connected with Krystle Schofield. I was having trouble with her last name, so I had to practice it a little bit while we stopped our meeting. But Krystle and I met at a conference, a photography conference called The Real Life, last November. And so we have in common documentary or storytelling photography, but we also have in common the fact that we have medical kids. And so Krystle agreed to be here with me and just talk about what photography is like, photographing other people's families, our own families, life with medical kids, kind of a whole bunch of different things. So, Krystle, tell us a little bit about your story, about who you are as a photographer and who you are as a medical mom.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. Thanks for the intro. So I'm a documentary photographer, as you said, and also a medical mom. I have two girls, and my youngest has a rare disease called Bacterial, and she's also a splenic, and she's 4 years old. So that really shifted my journey and has shifted sort of I guess my intent with my photography also. My photography journey started in the 90s in a dark room, so a long time ago, and in high school actually. So that was the first time I picked up a camera and just explored, with my friends, taking pictures around school, nature, all of that sort of stuff. And the craft of photography was really important for me, and still is. But when I had my first daughter, that's when I started to explore the area of documentary photography. And it really came to me one day when I was home by myself. I was on mat leave. And it was just like one of those chaotic moments where you're adapting to be a parent. And I was, like, I think my daughter had fallen asleep, and I was sanitizing like a breast pump or something, or like bottles, and I almost boiled the bottles to, like I left it on, and my daughter started crying, and I ran into the kitchen, and I looked down, and I was like, I'm wearing one shoe, and like this is just total chaos. Like the
Yep.
house is a mess. And I was like, why? Like I need to capture this time,
Yep. Yep.
And so I took a self-portrait in that moment, and I was like, this has got to happen. I started looking into, then this was in 2014, and I started looking into documentary photography, and a lot of women had actually started to post. They weren't in the images with their families, and they were spending all this time with their kids at home, but they weren't actually in the pictures. And one of the women I found actually had superimposed her face into a lot of the
Funny.
family pictures, which is hilarious. So I realized this was like a thing, and this was before the documentary family photography movement was as prevalent as it is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um, so that sort of like brought it to light, and I had this idea like I got to do this for other families, for other parents, not just the moms. There's a lot of dads who are at home as well with their kids. So that sparked my sort of interest in the documentary world for families. And then in 2016, I had my second daughter, and she, like I said, she was born with a rare disease. And when she was born, she wasn't diagnosed, and we spent 3 months in the NICU with her.
Yep.
Um, so that experience was unexpected, and we got through it, but it was really difficult. And my sort of therapy and way of connecting with her, with this new little baby I had that I couldn't take home with me for all that time, was to
Yep.
take pictures every day.
Yep.
And I actually would take a picture, and then every week I would print the pictures. And I had this huge, which we still have, this huge white canvas, like 10 feet by 6 feet, like massive, that was just sitting in the living room. And so I started to take the pictures. I printed them in little squares, and I just taped them to the canvas. So every week was like its own little group of images, and I was able to look back and kind of process, I think, what was
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah.
Process like these little milestones that were happening, or these hard moments that were happening every day.
And were you sharing those pictures with other people, or was that for you and your husband?
I shared it with like our support group. So I
Yeah,
shared it with family and close friends, and those people who were kind of following along our journey and
yeah,
wanting, I didn't share it publicly, and that's a whole other conversation we can
yeah,
have too. But for me, it was like an email that went out or a text that went out, like
yeah.
this is what happened today. We're preparing for this, or like we tried to get her off of air for today. She was had a
All
lot
the
of,
ups and downs of
yes,
life in the
all
NICU.
of that
Yeah,
stuff, right?
yeah,
So and at the end of it, I had the whole canvas filled, and we left it for a while because it was just like this way to reflect and like really to process, because it's
yeah,
a lot when you're in survival mode.
yeah,
I think if you're in the NICU or you're going through surgery or any of this stuff, like so many of our families, the medical families, the rare disease families are living at the hospital for periods of time, often,
hmm,
repetitively. So just to be able to really understand what that, emotionally absorb that
yeah.
is important. So that you
And
don't get hit by it 3 years.
yeah, and I think that like normalizing what that looks like other people, we didn't have any medical families that we knew going into having Kane. So we have a bit of a reverse situation in that you had your daughter, your first daughter, went home, things were normal. Um, and then you had a medical child, and then we had our medical child first. So that was our first experience, and it was the first grandkid in all of our grandparents' lives, like all of those things. And at the time, I was pretty new to photography. Like I had liked it, but I had taken a couple manual courses, and then we ended up in the NICU, and it just seemed like an opportunity to practice and keep me busy and focusing on not just all the negative things that can happen, and like you mentioned, like the ups and downs of life in hospital, like step forward and then 3 steps back about things, and just trying to find really positive ways. And pictures for me were that. um, we didn't start sharing our journey publicly either until probably 6 months later, when the same kind of like, hey, look at what's going on in my life, this is nuts, I gotta photograph this, and share this. That's when I started like sharing it a bit more. But in the beginning, it was just for us. And we were printing the pictures too. We had a baby book, and I had like a little photo printer. And so I would just like collage a week of it in one picture and add it to the baby book of like, here's who we met, and here's what we figured out about Kane in this time. And so I can absolutely relate to a lot of those ideas that you talked about, but also not being in the pictures. So I don't know if you can see behind me, I actually pulled these down for today's interview. This was the conscious decision to hire a photographer every 2 years, or trade services with a photographer so that I can be in the picture. So this was when Kane was 2 and I was pregnant, with our second, but just getting somebody to get me in the frame. Because self-portraits are one thing, and I do try to do that, but I'm not great at it. And I want my kids to see me in the pictures as well.
Yes.
Um, okay. So documentary family photography. You moved recently, and that has changed some of the things about what you were doing already. I mean, and then COVID as well. So that
Yeah.
has changed a lot of things for you. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so we moved from Vancouver, BC, to the island. So we live in Brightwood Bay, which is just out of Victoria. And I think in a lot of ways it was a great move. I had kind of, I should also say I'm also an interior designer, and I'm also an educator out of the school system. I teach architecture to kids.
Oh, I
Um,
didn't know that.
so
Okay.
yeah, so that's sort of, I'm one of these people who has like multiple streams going on at all times, plus the family stuff, um, and there's a lot of like medical admin that comes with being a parent of a child with a rare disease. So that's
Yep.
like a part-time job, as a lot of you know. um, but yeah, my move to the island actually has been really helpful for my photography, and it started, um, I think, just being in a smaller community. Um, you kind of can make connections in a different way,
Yeah.
and I felt like I had the space to really, I guess, develop what my intent is and my style, and focus in on what I really want to do with it. So I did initiate, and this was when we met
Yeah.
actually at the conference, a project that I wanted to do with rare disease families, because that seems to be our sort of community. And a lot of these families are living these extraordinary lives, and these parents are just like superheroes, you know, and the kids are superheroes, and the stuff that has become their normal is, you know, to the average person might seem quite wild, you know, but
Yeah.
I wanted to showcase the positivity in that, because it's not something to necessarily feel like bad about, you know, when you see families who are dealing with different things, like people have really found comfort in, or not comfort, but maybe just a normalcy in that life.
Yeah.
Um, and so I did initiate it, and I connected with several families, and uh, then COVID happened.
Yeah.
And the other thing that happened before that, and this is a reality for me, is that my daughter's immune compromised. So I had to be really cautious about who I, you know, who I was connecting with and when. And
Yeah.
I found a lot of the other families would have things come up where their kid was just not having a great day. And yes, it's great to photograph all moments, but sometimes, like, you know, you're just focused on the medical emergency that's right in front of you. So my real challenge with that was actually just like finding time to connect, and part of it is that my kids are young,
Yeah.
and I'm quite, you know, responsible for them at this point too. so
Can
so it's like,
relate.
it's the time and the space, you know, and
Yeah.
that's just a real life thing, and that'll evolve. So I'm sticking with it, and the connections continue to happen, and I just sort of, I'm letting my photography journey unfold at the
Yeah.
pace it needs to.
Well,
Yeah.
and Krystle has watched the interview, the first interview I did with Melanie Birch, because she's a rare family. Her daughter, Ella, has Rett syndrome. And so that's a family that I've followed. And so just another connection that Krystle and I have, before we went to real life, we both know a woman named Christina Nyborg who had told us the other person was going to be at this conference. And she just said, you need to connect, like you guys have a lot in common. You mentored with her, did you not?
I did not. When I was sort of exploring the documentary family photography community initially,
Yeah.
uh, I met her through a group of, through Felicia Chang,
Okay.
and she connected us. She just brought us all together at a pub one night, to
Oh,
be totally
nice.
honest, and we all met this one time, and
Yeah.
some great connections. And I haven't seen them in person since then, but like virtual, you know, connection was amazing.
It is great. And like, so all of the Felicia Chang and Christina Nyborg at the time and Krystle were all in Vancouver. And so they were able to connect up that way. And then Christina is my mentor. She's been working with me for a year since I met her at the Storytellers Photo Conference. So then Krystle and I were both in a workshop of Christina's called 21 Weeks. And so we got to kind of keep connecting that way. And tell us about your project for 21 Weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. So I decided to focus in on my own story, because I felt like, you know, I was almost getting ahead of myself trying to tell other people's stories, and I hadn't really learned how to tell my own story
Yeah.
succinctly.
Yeah.
Because as we know, there's like a story that happens every minute when you're in the hospital or you have a medical experience. So how do you distill that? And so it was a really good experience for me, and I did get down to the images that I felt told part of it anyways, and it's evolving. But yeah, it was really focused on our time in the NICU and what that meant for me, like for me as a mother,
Yeah.
from my perspective.
And did
Mhm.
you share that anywhere?
I have not yet.
Are you
No.
go? Do you think you would, or is
I
that
think I
more
would.
something for?
Yeah, no, I think I will put it up on my website. I think
Yeah.
it's important um, to find a, you know, a space in a way that I'm comfortable in sharing. And
Yeah.
I should preface this where, you know, I feel like I'm a little bit of an anomaly in the photography world, in that I don't share images of my kids on social media.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have pictures of them. I don't maybe have pictures of their faces. And a lot of that just comes from wanting to give them the choice as to how much of their life they want to share with
Yeah.
the world, um, when they get old enough to make
Yeah.
that decision. And I'm pretty conscious about that with my clients as well. When I photograph other kids' families, I know a lot of people are super comfortable with it. And I always just give up the choice. But so that's where I'm sort of trying to figure out the right method to share that story, I guess.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
please let us know, because I would love to. We have a Facebook group that you are in called You're Here for a Reason, and it is a community of families or individuals with medical complexities, and then also documentary photographers that are working in that like hospital or pediatric illness or illness, and just a place to kind of share information, share an image, and just a safe space to talk about that type of photography. And so Krystle has posted in there before with other stuff, like your video recently that you did for the BC education. So we can put a link to that in this video.
Yeah.
But I just, yeah, there's so many things, and I totally get the idea of not putting your kids images out there. That is like different people have different perspectives on that. Any images I tend to share for clients are something that I've said, are you okay with me sharing this? Like I will share
Yeah.
specific things and then ask them to share whatever they're comfortable with. Whereas with my own kids, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
And Maverick is somebody that doesn't, he will tell me not to take pictures and then we don't take pictures. Whereas with Kane, and because I photograph a lot of our medical story, as he's gotten older, that was a real struggling point for me. Like, am I just taking over the story and telling it without him being involved? And when I went to Storytellers Photo Conference last, I guess, May and a bit ago, right? Like a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
That was something that I was talking about with other photographers, and someone said, why don't you just make it a project together with Kane? So when you're going to the hospital, bring a camera with him and start documenting it together. So Kane and I do have a lot more conversations now about what he wants to do, and if he's taking pictures, we use those pictures too, and have kind of started doing some blogs together. As well, with his heart surgery last September, he brought a camera. I like checked in with him if he was okay. Like, so Kane had a camera with him. I had my camera. We had Roz of Slice of Love Photography come and take pictures. And together, like we are compiling those pictures together. So Kane doesn't always see all of those images, but I'm always checking in with him to see if he's still okay with me taking pictures. And at this point, he doesn't care at all. He's happy to take pictures. And actually in the summer, we like had a couple times where just him and I took a camera and went and had our own little photo shoot where he would take pictures of me and I would take pictures of him, and then we'd get together and like set the interval timer and take pictures together. So photography for us has been a thing that he and I do together, and he's comfortable with it. I do think down the line he won't want me to do all of what I've been doing, and I know that is a question that I get from parents in the medical world, like, how comfortable are your kids with this? At
Yeah.
this stage of the game, Kane is comfortable with it, but I don't see that happening forever. Um, and I think that documenting other families and their medical experience, like Melanie with her daughter Ella, she's comfortable right now. And she uses those images to tell their story and connect with other families with Rett, and just bring awareness to that rare disease. But it doesn't, I think that's a really good point, that it doesn't need to be something public. Like, it can just be for your family, and that's absolutely appropriate. A book could be just you figuring out, putting it all together so that you can process that, like what you were talking about with your canvas, and just going through all those images it's super emotional, and looking back at all of those images are super emotional, but it also reminds you of how strong you are and how resilient you are. And like, I talk a lot about the pictures of Kane's heart surgery. I'm glad he can see them, but they're not for him. And they're
Yeah.
not for my husband. And they are honestly for me, so that I can process that stuff, because stuff sucks.
It does, and it's real,
Yeah.
it's totally real. And I think that's, the point that you made about connecting with other families, that's something that I think with this type of photography is really valuable,
Yeah.
because, and that's where, we've done fundraisers for rare disease, and Alina, my daughter, has been like, the poster child,
Yeah.
where, and that sort of thing. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with her face and her image being shown for those sort of things that are really purposeful, and I'm okay for her to be like put out in that way.
Yeah.
Um, so that's why I say, what stream are the images going to go out in, and under what context? Because
Yeah.
if it's connecting with other families, like, it's very helpful, to know, for example, if you're part of a group where you're learning, my daughter has radioplasia, so she's missing a bone in her arm. And so there's a lot of conversation about, like, how do we get her to ride a bike, like one arm shorter than the other. And, just being able to show an image to other parents about what your kid has done,
Yeah.
that's really impactful. So those sort of things, I think are really, really important. And yeah, I lost my
I
train
do
of
that
thought.
all the time. There's so many things that
I
you
had
would
something.
say, and I'm like, okay, I got to remember to say this next, but then I forget and go on a
It'll
tangent.
come back. It'll
That's
come
how
back.
it works.
Yeah, it is.
And I
I was gonna
go,
say. Oh yeah, it came back. It came back. So I was gonna say that it's a really amazing challenge, also as a photographer, to take images
yeah,
without the face. You know, without the like support of facial expression,
yeah,
which is very impactful. That I find kind of, you know, it's a hard challenge, but it's interesting, creative challenge as well.
yeah.
So yeah.
I was just so there's a family in the Alberta community that recently lost their son, and I was able to go and photograph the celebration for them, which was amazing. But it's also COVID, and so everybody had masks on. So taking images of people as they're trying to talk to each other and like just it's the first time that I've photographed something where everybody's wearing a mask. And like there was different times where they were taking them off, but it really stood out to me as I started going through the images, just like you're depending so much on what their eyes look like when you cannot see their mouth, and like hand gestures. And it's a new one that I guess I hadn't really wrapped my head around what that would look like going into it. And I think like my goal is to document medical special needs and palliative families. And that is like what I want to do with my photography. But the reality of that situation right now is exactly what you said, that families aren't comfortable having other people in their life. There's no way that I will be in hospitals for the foreseeable future supporting families there. I know that a family that I had shot in a respite type situation has another family that they know that are palliative that they would like to get photos, but we don't even know if we can get in to take photos of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
And
Yeah.
so that's part of where, like we were talking about before we started recording this, that I have been writing a book about telling your story through photography, because right now there are a lot of families that can't use a photographer to tell their story, even if they want to. And so I think giving that power to families, you don't need a DSLR. You don't need to know how to do everything in manual, because it's still a skill. Christina would tell me that I am lacking in my amazing exposures. But the story and getting it for yourself, I think, is really important. So I want medical families, palliative families, special needs family, whether they're in hospital or not, to be thinking about how they can tell their own story, because sometimes you need it right in the middle of it. You need to be just taking those photos. Maybe you are sharing it with your family who can't see your child in hospital at that time, or maybe you're going to look back at those pictures and kind of do a review and like process it down the road. But I think just having some of those skills that at like a basic level, a lot of people appreciate that. And when you are in hospital, there's not a whole lot you're doing other than
Yeah.
waiting for rounds to come, like find out more answers that you never really find out the answer to. I think that it's just a good way to use your time and kind of be able to process what's happening at the same time.
Totally. And I think that book, which I haven't yet seen, but I'm excited to
It's
see
coming.
it, it's like a real gift to people because, like you said, there's some basic techniques and basic skills, and you don't need a fancy camera. You can use your phone,
Yeah.
and you can take really beautiful images. And I think there's a lot to be said about capturing also the environment that you're in when you're in hospital or when you're at home, you know, with the equipment, whatever's going on around you. It's not just you know, like just the people. It's the people within the environment and the tools and all of the things that are going on, because it's a lot to process, a lot to absorb, and it's important, I think, to capture the context, right? It helps to tell the story, and to explain to people who maybe haven't had experience in those rooms before. You know, they haven't been in an X-ray, you know, in the lab where you're getting these like X-rays, or they haven't been in a NICU or the PICU or whatever it is, to understand really what you're experiencing on a daily basis, right?
And normalizing it. Like every family that has done something like a chest x-ray with their kid with their arms like stuck in the, I don't know if you guys have done that, but that's a hard thing. Oh my God. Every time I see a picture of that, I'm like drawn back to the moment. And it's not a terrible, like your kid's usually screaming because they don't want to be in that stupid encased like
Oh
the
no, I
last,
was
but
bawling my eyes out when that happened. So he
right?
was like this big. I wasn't prepared for it, but yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so I think like images like that are triggering in some ways, but I actually have no problem with seeing images like that. It reminds me that we've done it. I remember like it's details that they do fall away, even though when you're in the thick of being in the NICU or the PICU or on a unit, you're like totally in it and there's things that you never want to see again.
Yeah.
But the reality is I still need to see those details later to remind us of what we've overcome. And that, yeah, we did it. We might have to do it again, but we can do it. And I think that like is a bit of hope too for people. It also, I don't know, there's just so many things about documenting in hospital and those like tough experiences. And it doesn't just have to be tough experiences in hospital. I think there's so many, like the loss of a loved one and looking back at pictures and using that to tell a story. There's so many different ways people could use storytelling photography to support just the grieving process. Because
Yeah,
honestly, being a medical mom is a lot about the grieving process at the same time, right?
it is. It is.
Yeah.
Yep. And you're reminding me a little bit too about and this you've been really active in this regard in sharing those images also, and obviously with the permission of everyone, but with
Yeah.
the care providers, like the doctors and the nurses and the people who are actually doing the work, because that's also their life on a
Yeah.
daily basis. And I think about this a lot, like they're doing these incredible things, like whether it's making, a splint for someone or, surgery, they're doing things that are unreal on a daily basis. And they probably don't have that captured
Yeah.
also. And I think it's probably easy for them to get really caught up in just the technicalities of their work. And
Yeah.
so to be able to show them, and I don't know if you've shared any of the images that I've shared just recently, actually, some of the images of when we were in the NICU with our OT and Alina's plastic surgeon, and they were like, "Wow, this, like so cool to see, us there and how little she was at that
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and just like these tiny little things that they're working on. It was pictures of them making a cast for her arm, and so I think that's also important. And then for them to be able to use those images to tell, and you can talk a little bit about this in more detail, but
Yeah.
stories about families in a real way,
Yeah.
without using canned images or stock images.
Yeah.
So
Something
yeah,
that's hugely important to me. And that's, it's how I want families to be able to get photos for free. I don't want medical families to have to pay for photos, but one of the things that I've been working on this year is just like, are there organizations that need the photos that will support basically pay for the photos so that families get the photos for free, but they have authentic medical images to use. And so it's a weird place. I'm actually talking on Monday with a family that we photographed as well in this situation where an organization paid for their photos. So the family got them for free, and then they were allowed to use those photos for their communications materials. So that process, it felt weird. And I am still kind of struggling with that a little bit, but the family had refusal on any, if there's any photos you don't want them to have, that's your choice. Like, so you get to see them all and make those decisions first. And then a lot of actually what the organization was looking for wasn't necessarily their faces. It was those detail shots of like using a touch device, like a wider scene of a hospital room, that kind of stuff. That's not, it's a little more generic. It's not necessarily about that person. And so still navigating this is going to be interesting. And I mean, you're the perfect person to talk about this with because you have chosen not to share all the images of your child. Like that's a decision that I want everybody to be able to make. But I also trying to figure out a way to get family photos for people where it's sustainable for me, because let's be honest, often I am talking to a psychologist after dealing with some of the stuff that I've photographed. And I need to be conscious of that. If I want to keep doing it, I need to make sure that I'm protecting myself as well. But then just making sure that it's not an additional cost for families, because there's so many costs that come along with many medical situations that are often unexpected.
yes, yes,
Okay,
yes.
soapbox done. What's next for you? What's happening for you guys? Photography or family?
Yeah. Well, we're in an interesting time right now, so um, we're kind of living by the moment, I think,
Yep.
trying to think too far ahead. But I, I guess I've just sort of put my intent out there in the universe, and I've had a little bit more interest in documenting businesses. So that's something that's kind of interesting for me, is to document real sort of experiences with a business. So that's a little bit of something I'm exploring. And
Yeah.
then the family thing is really tricky, to be totally honest, right now, because Alina's, we have to be super careful. Our bubble is closed. We're trying to figure out school, but we only have 4 people, are just our little family in the bubble. So how do I go out and photograph other families right now is something I'm trying to figure out, where my sort of boundaries lie, my comfort level
Yeah.
lies. Um, yeah, so, but I'm not closed to it. It's just, I think every opportunity has to be sort of assessed
On its
individually
own. Yeah.
on its own. Yeah,
And
yeah.
bringing that point up, we recently, I had my boys out on Vancouver Island and these guys were camping. So we met up on China Beach and we did a little photo session and we were some of the first people that have been outside your bubble, in your bubble.
Yeah, you were, yeah, and that was like an awesome experience. And to be honest, we have not had a lot of photographs taken of us, which is like not a great thing. I'd like to change that.
Yeah.
And it was really nice experience, and it felt like just a hangout. I really appreciated it.
Yeah.
How casual it was, and I think that's the thing that's amazing about documentary photography, is it really is that it's just you being you, in your day,
Yeah.
and someone hanging out with you, and having the eye and awareness to snap the picture when the moment arises.
Yeah.
And it was really nice to see like some of the connection moments that you caught between like myself and the girls, because yeah, I don't have that. I can't
Yeah.
I can't do like selfies of myself having like
Like
a
in the
moment.
moment, like I can take
Yeah,
pictures of me and my kids, but they are always more posed,
yeah,
right? Like having those, like having somebody else's eyes on you for those moments. And like even just going and spending a little bit of time with you, I still had my boys with me, which is not something I would
yeah,
normally do on a photography session. So
yeah.
I'm still like half an eye on them because I kind of trust them and I can hear them. I don't know if you can hear them, but they're arguing right now, right outside this room, and it's making me a little bit nuts, but that's our reality.
Yeah.
Um, but just being able to immerse yourself in that photography is one of the things that I really love, like getting to spend time with a family and we're just chatting about whatever's going on and just taking pictures as we go. So it's one of my favorite things about documentary photography, that I'm not telling you what we're doing. We're just hanging out.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. It's always like a pleasant surprise, I think.
yeah.
What you capture. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well, Krystle, thank you so much for spending time with us today. And I am going to stop our recording, but I want to ask you a few questions after. So
Okay.
this was Krystle. Let's do it. Krystle Schofield, because I was, again, practicing that before I said it.
Um,
Um,
well,
thank you so much.